Hi, welcome to Swedish Plant Guys. Finally, we have some spring, we have some warmth, and that's why it's time to plant your potatoes. And we thought we'd show you today how we do it, so you can get some tips and tricks about it. But first of all, you have to start by buying some seed potatoes. You do not want to buy the normal potatoes that you buy to eat from the store, but you have to buy specific seed potatoes. Now usually they are controlled so that they don't have any fungus or other pesticides on them, and that's not good. You don't want that when your potato starts to grow. So you buy the seed potatoes, and when you buy them, they are usually clean on all of the surface of the potato. So what you want to do, because if you plant it like this, you can plant it like this, but then it will take quite some time before the potatoes start to grow and before you see any foliage. So what you need to do is that you can put the potato on, let's say, a windowsill where it's quite light inside, and just lay them there for a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And they will start to sprout like this. I can show you. Now, these are not roots that come up. These are seedlings or seeds. So this will become the foliage later on. And that's pretty important when we start to plant this into the soil. But since it has started to grow, then you have an expectancy about 8 weeks. When you put it in the ground, it takes about 8 weeks until you can start to harvest your potatoes. If you do this, you are well prepared. Now, the other thing you have to prepare is the soil. Potatoes likes the soil to be quite hot. Likes to grow when the soil is hot. So never plant a potato if it's below 8 degrees Celsius. So wait until spring finally has arrived before you plant the potatoes. But if you want to do it earlier than that, you can cover the soil with something, a cloth or something, to heat up the soil underneath a little bit. And then you can start a little bit earlier. Now, the soil needs to be prepared as well. The potatoes need to grow in quite loose soil. So if you have a hard and compact soil, you need to loosen it up. I have added some soil to this here, and we are also in a raised bed, as you can see here, which is also good because in a raised bed you get the soil to be a little bit warmer than when you grow it straight on the ground. I've added some soil to this because during the winter the soil has compacted a little bit. That's natural. It's what happens when these organic materials start to decompose. It's going to compact a little bit. So I've added soil, and now we have to prepare the soil by loosening it up so it's not as hard and firm as it's been during the winter time. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Now, I haven't added any nutrients to this soil because I know that this soil has a lot of nutrients in it. But if you want to, you can add some natural cow manure and mix that into the soil. But you don't want to have too much nutrients for potatoes because especially if you have too much nitrogen in the soil, the foliage is going to be quite large, and also the potatoes are going to swell and become quite watery and not as good as you want them to be, not as tasty. So the soil there shouldn't be too much nutrients in it. So I'm going to start now by loosening up this and mix the new soil with the old soil and loosen it up to get a lot of air down, a long way down into this raised bed. There, so now I've loosened up the soil, and I've also tried to push it down a little bit so that it's not too loose, because Now we're going to plant the potatoes here. And we're going to start by making some, make some scores in the soil. Fåror in Swedish, where we're going to plant the potatoes. Now, if you plant these on natural ground, you want to have about between 17 to 30 centimeters in between every potato, and you want to have at least 60 centimeters in between each row of potatoes. Now, if I did that here, I wouldn't get a lot of potatoes into this area that I have here. So I'm going to put them maybe 15 centimeters apart in between every potato, but I'm only going to have about 30 centimeters in between every row. And when doing this, you're going to have quite a lot of potatoes in a small area. And it's really important that every year you switch the area where you've had the potatoes. So next year I'm not going to plant it in this raised bed. I'm going to plant it in the next one next to me here, and I'm going to have some lettuce and other things in this one. And then I'm going to move to another one the next year. So I will get back to this raised bed maybe 4 years later, 3 to 4 years later. Because there are a lot of things going on in the soil. We're not going to go in that deep to it, but you need to move them around, otherwise you can get some pests. And the normal thing you get on potatoes is actually mildew. It's called bladmjöl in Swedish. You see that on the foliage, that something is happening to the leaves. They're getting a little bit rusty or a little bit silvery on them, and they're not, you can see that they're not feeling that well. If you get mildew on your potatoes, on the foliage, usually it's quite long and you've maybe perhaps started to pick up the potatoes. If you see mildew, then cut off all of the foliage and take it away. And just leave the potatoes in the ground. You can still harvest them for a couple of weeks after they are just sitting in the soil. But now we're going to make the divide up where we're going to plant our potatoes. So I'm going to get about, let's see, 5 rows of potatoes in this raised bed here. So I'm going to start by making these rows a little bit deeper. I'm going to explain to you in a second why. You might have seen this on potato fields, that they have cupped the soil like this. However, that's usually a little bit later in the season when the foliage has started to come up. But I do it already, and here's why. Because when we're going to plant the potatoes now, you want to plant them approximately 8 to 10 centimeters down into the soil. And if you have pre-sprouted your potatoes like this, like I said before, these are not roots, these are going to be the foliage on the potato. So you want to put this down in the soil facing upwards, not downwards. You could put it downwards as well, but what's going to happen in the soil is that this is going to have to make the way around the potato and then grow up. But you put it like this, and it's going to get up quite quickly. And it's going to go down 8 to 10 centimeters. Now, I could just put these down into the soil like this, and then even out the soil, water it and wait. But I'm not going to do that because I've tried this for 4 or 5 years now. And what I do instead is that I go down to this. We're already down maybe 8 centimeters into the soil. And I'm going to dig this potato down even further, about 8 centimeters more, and plant it there. And then I'm going to leave this row of potatoes open so that you have the potato down here. Because when this starts to grow up and reaches the root level like this, you're going to get the new potatoes in between the seed potato and where the soil level is. So the new potatoes are going to come up here in between the soil and the seed potato. So if you can have this part here a little bit longer, you're going to get more potatoes. Now I've experimented with this, and I found that I have gotten maybe 3, 4, 5 more potatoes on every plant by doing like this. So we're going to go down a little bit deeper so that we're actually starting the potato 8 centimeters under the actual level of the soil. Now, when we planted this down, after a couple of weeks, you're going to see that the foliage are going to break the level of the soil. And you can see that it's going to start to come up. And when it has grown up about 15 centimeters maybe, then you start to cup it. Now this is what you usually see out in the fields, where you have these rows of soil like this. And this is because if the potatoes that are growing, if the sunlight hits those potatoes, then the potato is going to turn green, hard, and you don't want to eat that potato. So you want to have an even thick layer of soil around where the potatoes are growing. So as the foliage comes up, the new potatoes are actually going to sprout out from the stem of the foliage. So you cup the soil around the stem as it grows up. You just cup it around. So these here ridges are actually going to be where we plant the potatoes later on in the season. So all of this is going to gradually be pushed by me onto the stem and onto the foliage as it grows up. And this means that you have maybe 20 to 30 centimeters of space in between the potato seedling and the top of the soil. And it's here that you're going to get all the new potatoes. And then the foliage will go up. So we're going to start to plant this now. And as I said, I'm going to push them down about 8 to 10 centimeters. Let's see. Also, I have 2 different types of potatoes here. I have one that is a delicacy potato that's called cherry, I think. And the other one is called, I think this is cherry. And the other one is called Maria. Now I have 2 different types. Well, of course, because it's quite tasty to have different types of potatoes. But also if one of these are going to get some pests on them, or if I have trouble with it, I have another one that is hopefully going to give me a lot of harvest. So that's why I always have 2 different types of potatoes, so that I will always get some type of harvest, even if I get trouble. So we have 2 types, and I'm going to divide that up now. When I plant the 2 different types, I usually plant one in one corner and the other one in the next corner. You could mix them if you want to, but I do this so that I know that I have one on this side and one on that side, because when the foliage come up, it's quite difficult to differentiate them, to see which is which. So then I'll know that I have one on this side, I have one on that side, but if you want to mix them, that's fine. Now when you're going to plant this down into the soil, be quite careful, because you don't want these small seedlings to break off, because they can break off quite easily. So don't throw the potato, or don't try not to touch on these small parts here, because they can break off quite easily. Now I've put out the potatoes approximately where I want to dig them down, 8 to 10 centimeters. And as I said before, the space in between every potato is approximately 15 centimeters, approximately. And the spaces between the rows here are maybe 30 centimeters. Now, in a perfect situation, you want to have about 60 centimeters, but then I wouldn't get a lot of potatoes in this raised bed. So I have about 30 centimeters in between the rows and 15 centimeters in between every potato. Now I had enough potatoes to even out them in this raised bed. I have one left, and I'm going to show you, because if I had bought if I didn't have enough of potatoes to fill up this, you can actually take a potato and cut it off. Now you can cut it like this. Just cut it in two. And then you take this potato and you lay it down on the windowsill again, and let this exposed parts dry out, and there will be, it will form like a form of, you can get a little bit of a shield here. So you can't cut it and then plant it directly, because this is going to rot. You have to put it on the windowsill and let it dry out for a couple of days before you put it. But then you have 2 potatoes instead of 1, and this is going to work just as fine. So if you don't have enough, you can cut them off and plant them as 2 instead. Now I'm going to plant these, each and every one of them, and like I said, I could just put this soil over the top here, and that would be fine, and then start cupping it when the foliage starts to come up. But I want to have a little bit more space between the top of the soil and the potatoes eventually, when everything is done. So I'm going to use the soil top here that is now 10 centimeters under this soil. I'm going to use that as the top. So I'm planted 8 to 10 centimeters further down. And always with these small seeds upwards. So the potatoes are down in the ground, and now I'm just going to make sure that this soil here doesn't fall down on top of the different rows here. So I'm just going to compact that a little bit, and then when I water, it's going to stay like this. And after a couple of weeks in these rows, you're going to see that the foliage is going to start to come up. It's going to break the soil here, and when it's come up about 15 centimeters, you start to move this soil on the sides towards the plant, so that you cover the stem of the plant all the way until all this soil here is on top of or around the foliage of the potato. And that is called cupping the potato. So now there's only one thing left to do, and that is to water your potatoes. And the potato needs quite a lot of water. So if the rain doesn't come as much, then you have to water it yourself, and make sure that it's always a little bit moist in this raised ground. And if it's going to be quite hot, then make sure to check that the soil is moist, because the potato doesn't like to dry out too much. So water and water and water. Now, you don't have to add any nutrients to this. Like I said before, if you get too much nutrients to the potato plants, the foliage is going to shoot out and become quite large, and the potatoes are going to be very watery and not that good. So now there's only one thing left to do, and that is to water this and make sure that it's quite moist all the time. So that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to plant your potatoes. Now if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now until next time, hej då!